Okay, so The Mom in 283 and the Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. One day, they were looking for an apartment in London in the 1960s. His mom was, and his mom was married to his dad, who's white, and they were looking for an apartment. And then the dad found one in London. And then when the landlady saw them, she ordered them out. "You didn't tell me your wife was Jamaican," she told my father in a rage. In her book, my mother describes her struggles to make sense of this humiliation, to reconcile her experience with her faith. In the end, she was forced to acknowledge that anger was not an option, that as a colored Jamaican whose family had benefited for generations from the hierarchy of race, she could hardly reproach another for the impulsive to divide people by the shade of their skin. Okay. I complained to God in so many words. Here I was, the wounded representative of the Negro race, and our struggle to be accounted free and equal with the dominating whites. And God was amused. My prayer did not ring true with him. I would try again, and then God said, "Have you not done the same thing? Remember this one and that one, people whom you have slighted or avoided or treated less considerately than others, because they were different superficially. And you were ashamed to be identified with them. Have you not been glad that you are not more colored than you are, grateful that you are not black?" My anger and hate against the landlady melted. I was no better than she was, nor worse for that matter. We were both guilty of the sin of self-regard, the pride and the exclusiveness by which we cut some people off from ourselves. It is not easy to be so honest about where we're from. It would be simpler for my mother to portray her success as a straightforward triumph over victimhood, just as it would be simpler to look at Joe Flum and call him the greatest lawyer ever, even though his individual achievements are so impossibly intertwined with his ethnicity, his generation, and the particulars of the garment industry, and the peculiar biases of downtown law firms. Bill Gates could accept the title of genius and leave it at that. But it takes no small degree of humanity for him to look back on his life and say, "I was very lucky," and he was. My great-great-grandmother was brought at Alligator Pond. That act, in turn, gave her son, John Ford, the privilege, so bought, again, like bought as a slave, gave him the privilege of a skin color that spared him a life of slavery. The culture of possibility that Daisy Ford embraced and put to use so brilliantly on behalf of her daughters was passed on to her by the peculiarities of the West Indies social structure. And then at the end he asked, what if those privileges were extended to others? How many more would now live a life of fulfillment in a beautiful house high on the hill? Okay, so this is a story, and this is going to be our conclusion. 97, page 97, we talked about Chris Langan, and basically he got a scholarship, and then because he didn't know to renew, his mother forgets to sign his financial aid form every year, and they take away his scholarship. He tries to move from a morning to an afternoon class, something students do every day, and he gets stopped from it. So, why were Langan's teachers at Reed and Montana State so different, so not caring, right? And the guy's like, "Oh, well, colleges are just government bureaucracies," but this is what Malcolm Gladwell says. He says, like, "Oh, well, colleges do want to help you, and that's what professors do all the time." What Langan told me of his life story, I couldn't help thinking of Robert Oppenheimer, the physicist whose family headed the American effort to develop the nuclear bomb during World War II. Oppenheimer went to Harvard and then on to Cambridge University to pursue a doctorate in physics. His gift was for theoretical physics, and his tutor, a man named Patrick Blackett, who would win a Nobel Prize in 1948, was forcing him to attend a minute of experimental physics, which he hated. He grew more and more emotionally unstable. Oppenheimer began to act so strange to this day, no one has properly made sense of it. Oppenheimer took some chemicals from the laboratory and tried to poison his tutor. Blackett found something was amiss. The university was informed. Oppenheimer was called on the carpet, and they put him on probation. After protracted negotiations, it was agreed that Robert would be put on probation and have regular sessions with a prominent Harley Street psychiatrist in London. So, again, we have two brilliant college students. One runs into a problem that impales his career. Oppenheimer tried to poison his tutor. To continue on, they replete their cases, and Langen gets no scholarship, but Oppenheimer gets a psychiatrist, and they got treated completely differently. Oppenheimer continues to be a scientific director of the Manhattan Project 20 years later. So Chris Langen lives in rural Missouri on a horse and farm, and he just, keeps up with his farm. So Oppenheimer, what Malcolm Gladwell says is basically he had that practical intelligence. He knew how to talk the talk. And he was not a smart guy at all. He didn't have any administrative experience. He couldn't run a hamburger stand. He was not smart, right? And then you have Oppenheimer had charm. Oppenheimer would put on all his charm and brilliance. It was an irresistible performance. He's such a genius. So that's the difference between Chris Langen and Oppenheimer, which is why we read that thing about communication, like knowing how to talk to people and being confident in themselves gets people a job more than your intelligence, because we have Chris Langen, who was intelligent. He was a very intelligent kid, but he still didn't get anywhere with it. He taught himself to read at 3, okay? He knew how to talk at 6 months old, right? Yet, he tries to talk to his professor at Montana State, and he's like, hey, I had a calculus teacher, and I wanted to ask him questions, and I had to chase him down to his office. I asked him, why are you teaching in this way? Why do you consider this practice to be relevant to calculus? And this tall, lanky guy had sweat stains under his arms, turned around, looked at me and said, there is something you should probably get straight. Some people just don't have the intellectual firepower to be mathematicians. And that was that. And so you have a student, a math prodigy, right? And the professor, and the prodigy wants to be engaged with a mind that loves mathematics as much as he does, but he fails. And that fact is the most heartbreaking part of all. He manages to have an entire conversation with his calculus professor without communicating the fact that would appeal to a calculus professor. The professor never realized that Chris Langen is good at calculus. So, again, Malcolm Gladwell does add the miscommunication aspect, which I get it because I'm still confused with conversation as well. But with conversation, I feel like some people could know, hey, I'm really interested in calculus and I'd love to talk to you more about it. And there's like certain ways that you can say words to people. Like when you approach someone, first you'll try, oh, but why are you teaching this way? And then they don't like that. But then you say, oh, I like your shoes. You have such a nice hair. It's kind of like, being one of those salesmen. You know how to talk to people. And we've seen that manipulation happen a lot. And then there's people who don't have it and never were learned it, never were taught it. So, yeah, he says that Chris Langen never pursued mainstream publishers as hard as he should have, going around querying publishers, trying to find an agent. I haven't done it, and I'm not interested in doing it. It was an admission of defeat. Every experience he had outside of his own mind had ended in frustration. He knew he needed to do a better job at navigating the world, but he didn't know how. He couldn't even talk to his calculus teacher, for goodness sake. These were things that others with lesser minds could master easily. And I have an experience like this. I had a professor, and instead of me connecting with him and talking to him, he was a nice guy. He did business ethics, and his name was Ben. And there was another girl who was like this white girl. She knew how to get registered and have ADHD. Like, I didn't even know the school has a doctor that'll like test me and diagnose me with ADHD, because that could have helped me in class. But then as well, she ended up going to the professor for help. And then we had another professor who was a smart guy too for like case study research, and she went to him for help as well. And I just thought it was so cool how she knew to talk to these professors and get help from them, whereas I would see them in class and I would never know to build that connection. So yeah, some people they do. And now she's at Oxford. She studies at Oxford. So she was from Bulgaria, a blonde white girl from Bulgaria, and she didn't seem all that. She liked Taylor Swift.